Hey, happy Monday, year 9. Welcome back to week 11, session 1. Okay, I would just like to say at this point as well, some wonderful work coming through. Thank you, Spencer, for your versions of your speech that you're writing. Really good. I've seen a brilliant speech from Seth. I might have mentioned him last week. Austin is doing an amazing job. Been really pleased with Holly's work. So it's just to say that there are some really good standards being set already, some lovely work coming through. So it's just to encourage you that to try your best this week. Now, I did say that this week we are going to create time in the last two lessons. So really, we're going to be looking at session 3 and 4 for you to really have your own time to improve the speeches, to rewrite them, to polish them, to kind of do a Mary Poppins job, okay? In other words, to make them practically perfect in every way. To support that process, today and tomorrow, we're going to do some activities that are just designed to get us thinking again about how our speeches could look, how they could be constructed, and how we can move towards that. So again, just a quick reminder, our link to future outcomes. We're going to be writing speeches that will contribute to our GCSEs. We have done the background work on ethos, logos, and pathos. We are now in the arrangement and style section. Now it says here 4 and 5, memory and delivery. So once we've written them, there are sometimes things that we do to aid the memory of a speech and then to practice delivering, but that's for another week. We're still on 1 to 3. So we have begun to write our speeches. As I've mentioned, Seth, Austin, Holly, Spencer, there are other people as well. We have begun to write our speeches. I've seen some brilliant examples. Charlotte has begun to write a really good speech. So we know we're there. You have all chosen a topic. We have completed the invention, planning, researching. We've all been introduced to the arrangement and know the shape of a speech. We've all been introduced to the style choices. And at the end of last week, you would have had the opportunity to write the character setting and rising action paragraphs. Now, because this week is about polishing and refining, we're just going to look today at the speech structure, character setting, and rising action, and just make sure that we're really happy with those aspects of our work before we go on to look tomorrow at how we do the climax, falling action, and ending. So to that end, I've written an example speech in which I aim to persuade people to agree with my chosen statement that we have a moral duty to end child labour across the world. And I have followed the speech structure. Now, what we're going to focus on to do today is reading each section of the speech and answering the questions at the end. Now, through this process, you'll be able to glean, it's not a perfect speech, but again, some of the way that we can be structurally building up our sense of style, organization, development of points, that's going to lead into what I asked you to do, particularly tomorrow. Okay, so all you need to do is listen as I read this section of my speech, and then we're going to lead into some questions. So we're going to listen and answer some questions. Okay, so this is my speech. Are you ready? You're sitting comfortably? Question, will I persuade you? So good morning and thank you for joining me today. I am lucky to have been born in a country in which child labour was abolished over 100 years ago, a country in which education for all is taken for granted. I have lost count of how many times I've moaned about going to school, complained because the lesson's too boring, or because I don't want to get out of bed so early. But my complaints are clearly absurd when you consider the number of children who would cherish the opportunity to learn. Instead, they are forced to work in dangerous and unsuitable jobs with little hope of a prosperous future. I would like to start by telling you a story, a true story. It is the story of Alejandra. Alejandra is only 12 years old, but every day she's woken up at 4 in the morning by her father. She does not go to school, but she goes to collect curlews, small mollusks in the mangrove swamps on the islands of Espiritu Santo, El Salvador. Alejandra spends 14 hours each day in the mangrove swamp without shoes, facing bad weather, mosquito bites, and cuts and scrapes from having to pull the curlews out from deep in the mud. She earns very little. If she's lucky, in one day, Alejandra manages to collect 2 baskets of curlews, 150 shells, worth little more than 12 colones, or $1.40. Alejandra, who has 7 younger brothers and sisters, has no time to go to school or play with other children, but she never complains. I have never met Alejandra and never will, but her story is no less devastating than if I knew her personally. She's not a remote figure. She's a real human being who deserves a childhood and an education. I might be one of the lucky ones, but I'm not blind to the suffering of others. Now, guys, I'm going to show you the questions. Now, if you need to, you might want to pause and then just move back and forth between the 2 screens to check and find your answers, okay? I just couldn't fit it on one slide at this stage. So these are the questions. Then you're going to pause and look back across the 2 screens. Okay, my lovelies? So, questions. What impression have I tried to create for myself, or of myself, sorry, in this opening? Is this part of the ethos, pathos, or logos element of speech? So actually, we've got a 1 in 3 chance. So have a little look again. What have we tried to create? The ethos, pathos, or logos? Which rhetorical figure have I used in the opening line of my speech? So where I've said, I am lucky, lucky too. Am I using antiplosis, hyperporia, or litotes? So which of the rhetorical figures have I used? Now, when I talk about myself, even though I'm complaining about school, is this an example of an anecdote or antithesis? And can you think why I might have done it? And finally, why have I included that story about Alejandra here? How does it contribute to creating ethos? So with those questions, I just want you to pause, and you might need to look between the 2 screens again. You might just need to flick back there and flick back there, etc. Okay, but you'll be able to control that yourself and answer those questions. And I'll see you in a minute for the answers. Okay, are we ready? Let's have a little look at the answers. And as if by magic, ooh. Okay, so what impression have I tried to create of myself? Is this part of the ethos, pathos, or logos? Brilliant. So this is the ethos part. Here I am presenting myself as knowledgeable, informed, interested, like somebody that genuinely cares about this. I've tried to create a credible, trustworthy ethos. Okay, somebody that you can trust, somebody that you can like. Brilliant. Ethos is the right answer. Give yourself a tick. Now, which rhetorical figure have I used in the opening line of my speak? Antiplosis. Why? Because, if I just flick back, I am lucky, full stop, lucky. So I've used the same word at the beginning of the sentence that I ended the other one. Hyperporia would have been the rhetorical question that I would have answered. And Leotes, if I'd have been describing it in terms of what it is not. Okay, so Plosius is the right answer. Now, when I talk about myself, is this an example of antithesis or anecdote? It's anecdote. I'm telling that personal story. Now, the reason why, there might be some variation, but some of the things we should be looking for, because using a personal story creates a sense of relationship between myself and the audience. It creates a sense of me being genuine, of being genuinely interested. Now, any disclosure when we tell a personal story helps to make us seem trustworthy. Oh, she trusts us enough to tell us what she was like when she was young. Okay, so anecdote. Now, remember, antithesis would have been if I was using opposites. Okay, but anecdote is that personal story. Now, why have I included the story about Alejandra here? How does it contribute to creating ethos? Well, it shows I have knowledge about the topic because I can research and I've presented the story of Alejandra, but also that I'm passionate about this topic, that I genuinely care about what's happening to her and her plight. Also, it's seemingly, there is a connection. I'm talking about complaining about going to school, and yet she's got every reason to complain and she doesn't. So there's a little bit that lovely kind of juxtaposition between the 2 lives that we live. Now, again, how do we use this? Potentially, you've already written your setting. You've already begun. You've got a lovely kind of opening paragraph in which you create, sorry, not setting, but character. But you might be thinking, gosh, there's not enough there. Or how am I going to create a speech that really impresses? So you might want to look at that opening again. I think I could bring in an anecdote. Okay, have I used a rhetorical figure? Is it clear that I'm creating a sense of ethos? So we will use my speech to kind of help us with our own. That's looking ahead. So we're going to look at the next stage of my speech now and have some more questions. Okay, and what is more? Alejandra is just one of millions of children engaged in child labour across the world. So I've springboarded from the story of the individual Alejandra into the bigger topic here of child labour. UNICEF defined child labour as the exploitation of children through any form of work that deprives children of their childhood. interferes with their ability to attend regular school, and is mentally, physically, socially, or morally harmful. So can you see how I'm integrating research? Okay, so I'm starting to use research within my writing, but that's still really a, can you see it? A definition and amplification paragraph. So there's my topic sentence. What more? Alejandra's just one of millions. Then I've used a bit of amplification and definition. Okay, so I'm still using the skills from last week, but I'm just showing as well how we can again improve and just create an even better speech. So recent global estimates based on data of UNICEF, the ILO and the World Bank indicate that 168 million children aged 5 to 17 are engaged in child labour. At least 85 million children do very hazardous work. Mining is one of the most dangerous jobs across the world, but about 1 million children work in mines in appalling conditions that can lead to injury or death. Children also work on building sites and in brick-making factories without proper health and safety rules. Children are at risk from machinery, chemicals, harsh working conditions, and lots of other hazards. Those who are forced to become soldiers or slaves are treated very badly and suffer terrible physical and mental harm and abuse, as well as sexual exploitation. Child domestic workers are also at risk of sexual abuse and violence. So actually what I've done here, and what I've tried to illustrate here, is whereas last week we were growing paragraphs, this is actually a series of paragraphs linked to that idea of defining and amplifying what child labour is. Here I've brought in all my research. I've got my statistical research, I've got my definitions, but I'm definitely demonstrating that I have knowledge here, that I have researched, and I'm appealing to your sense of reason. Your logical brain is being engaged here through the statistics and the explanations and the definitions. One particular horrifying form of child labour is bonded labour, which is the most common form of modern slavery. Debt bondage occurs when a person is forced to work to pay off a debt. They are tricked into working for little or no pay, with no control over their debt. So you've got a little bit more of that kind of definition and amplification here. Most or all of the money they earn goes to pay off their loan. The value of their work invariably becomes greater than the original sum of money borrowed. Sometimes the debt can be passed down the generations, and children can be held in debt bondage because of a loan their parents had taken decades ago. So that because does offer a little bit of explanation, okay, a reason why. So what we're seeing here is that sometimes definition and amplification and explanation can be more than a sentence. We can use those skills to kind of sustain a speech and offer enough detail. But can you answer these questions? Number one, how is the second section of speech showing a change from ethos to logos? So where I start here, we can definitely see we've changed. We've moved away from the ethos section into the logos section of my speech. But how am I doing it? Am I continuing to use an anecdote? Am I beginning to use facts and statistics, or am I using emotive vocabulary? Question 2, can you list 2 facts that have been used? 3, saying what UNICEF say child labour is an example of what type of sentence? Is it an explanation of effects? Is it a definition and amplification sentence? Is it an explanation? So that's trying to get you to think back to the work we did last week. And 4, where have I used emotive language to present the facts in a powerful way? So can you find any examples of emotive language? Okay, so you're going to do a similar process as before. You're going to pause, you're going to give yourself the time you need to answer these questions, and that might involve looking back or listening back. Magic of YouTube, you can always rewind and hear me read that section of the speech again. But we'll meet together in a few minutes and look at the answers. Okay, so you ready? Brilliant, off you go. Okay, lovely people, so we're showing that change from ethos to logos, yes, through the use of facts and statistics. So that logical appeal to reason coming through facts and statistics. What 2 facts? There were others, but 85 million, 168 million. Okay, and saying that UNICEF saying what UNICEF say child labour is an example of definition and amplification. So there's a real clear definition of child labour, and then that's amplified and made even bigger as they give us the different examples. And that's a lovely way to sustain and keep your speech and your ideas going. Now, there's quite a few examples of emotive language. So these 3 are not exhaustive, but we're looking for that word that makes something seem particularly emotive and appeals to our emotions. So we've got horrifying, tricked, appalling. All of these word choices are making the speech seem even more dramatic and powerful and emotional.